Beyond the Pillion is recorded on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and we would like to pay our respects to elders, past and present.
Welcome to Beyond the Pillion. My name is Kahiwa Sebire. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the chaotic one.
And my name is Mark Drechsler, he, him pronouns, and with motorcycling, like in so many other things, it's not size that counts, it's how you use it.
Yes.
It's true.
Sure. Welcome to episode 14. Today we are talking about the whole group ride deal.
Yes. Now, for some people who get into motorcycling, then riding is about solitude. It's about getting away from humans. It's about feeling the connection with your machine, with the road, with the nature and environment around you, and staying as far away from humans as you possibly can. However, for others, it can also be a fantastic way to meet new people, and a very typical way of doing that is to go on that fascinating experience that is known as a group ride.
Yes, it is quite a different experience, I think, riding with two or more other people compared to riding by yourself. There's a shared sense of camaraderie and that shared experience as well. And I think this is particularly relevant this week. Because as we approach the Royal Enfield One Ride event that you're organising here in Adelaide, Mark, there's going to be quite an exciting time and experience for the people signed up. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. That will be, so it's a global event that happens this year it will be on September 17th, which is a week tomorrow morning. It is an opportunity for any Royal Enfield riders around the world to get together and go on a group ride. I think they're expecting about 15,000 riders worldwide. Wow. At the moment, the Adelaide event is looking like we should have 50 riders. We might, if the weather's good, we might even get up to 60-ish maybe. So it's going to be, in relative terms, quite a large group. It's going to be heading off from the dealership that I work at in Melrose Park and heading down to Victor Harbour via Bull Creek Road, which is a sort of nice way through the hills. So anybody on Sunday morning that is out and about and looking to see some really cool retro styled bikes that are all going out in a great big pack, then keep an eye out. I think we're leaving at about 9 o'clock and probably getting into Victor by sort of 10:30, 10:45, and then all the bikes will be parking up there, which I'll talk a little bit about later. Having at least 40 bikes all parking up in one designated parking space.
That's going to be so cool.
Interesting. It'll be cool, but just the logistics of having that many, that many bikes all moving as one great big school of fish is going to have a few things that we will have to think about. So that's a bit about One Ride anyway, happening in a city, town near you if you are into Royal Enfield's or own one.
And I think that talks to a little bit, one of the things about group rides is some of that kind of logistical organising when you're at a large enough group, a place to meet, a place to finish, thinking about parking and similar for everyone who might be involved. And that's probably more relevant if you are considering organising one. But if you're just thinking about joining in on a group ride, which I assume most of your listeners are probably just wanting to join in on a ride, I think they can be really, really good fun. They are a great opportunity to meet people, as you said. They're often an opportunity to go visit new places that you might not go by yourself. Or to find new routes or locations or different ways of getting somewhere that others particularly like or that work really nicely for a motorbike. And again, that's just that shared experience, being able to sit down, have a conversation with someone about how you found that ride and what you liked and all those types of things. It's quite different when you are with a group of people. I think there's also that sense of community when you are in a larger group actually riding together. A couple of the rides that I've been with, the dealership that you work at, Mark, and a few others, there's something quite special about seeing motorbikes in front of you, motorbikes in the rear view, and all travelling together that can feel quite special in a bit of an intangible kind of way, but it's quite nice. I feel like they can also be a bit intimidating at the start. I know for me it was certainly something, the first group ride I was a part of, I was a bit worried about being too slow or not having good enough technique, or what if I fall off, or what if I stall at the lights? Am I going to be pissing people off in front of me or behind me? So if you are anything like that, we have a few tips for riding in groups. Whether you are joining in on the one ride or just other rides with colleagues or friends or groups, hopefully some of these will be helpful. So Mark, what's the first tip that you have?
First tip that I was going to suggest for people thinking about getting into group rides is once you find a ride, then talk to whoever is leading and or organising the ride. They're usually one and the same person. Find out who they are and have a chat to them about your ability. Make it clear that particularly target audience for this podcast is for newer riders, so letting the organisers know that you're new, you might make some mistakes. Are there particular things that are expected of you as a rider? And starting to unpack, and it's going to vary from ride to ride, whether there are any particular group norms that are expected of you when you're out on a ride. Like Kahiwa, I know you've had experience in this, haven't you?
Yeah, I think there are some rides that may be a bit more formal, shall I say, in terms of their organisation. And even a group ride that I did as part of the Rad Skills training course that I went on. There was a very clear conversation up front about the specific roles or protocols that we do as a group when we're riding together. I think Mary Knights in episode 9 talked a little bit about those that she has in place for rides through the Women Two Wheels South Australia group. And in particular how they approach group rides. And some of those things include you having really clearly identifiable ride leaders. So these are the people who are up the front, they set the pace, they set the route, and the expectation is that everyone kind of falls in behind them. I know that Mary talked about wearing her pink high-vis vest so that she is clearly identifiable to everyone in the group, but also to other drivers and people who are using the road. She also talked about having a tail end Charlie. So this is a particular motorbike group ride protocol, which is just really someone who is at the back who's kind of there to make sure that no one in the group gets lost or gets left behind. And they tend to have a clear plan of the planned route as well. So their job is just to keep an eye out for anyone who might get lost. So if you are new to group rides and one of the things that you are worried about is getting left behind or getting lost, then it could be useful to have that conversation, as you were saying, Mark, about the group norms or expectations and just see if anyone is fulfilling that kind of tail end Charlie role, even if it's not what it's called. Is there someone who will be staying near the back to keep an eye out for anyone who might get lost or left behind? Mark, what else have you seen in some of the rides that you've been a part of?
On the more formally structured rides that I've been on, quick shout out to SA Outback Motorcycle Adventures. I've been on a couple of rides with them and they are really well organised for anybody that does adventure riding in South Australia. They are fantastic. They have, they use a system called the Cornerman system, which has kind of similar to what you were talking about with Women Two Wheels group. It has a lead rider. It does have a tail end Charlie, but it also uses all of the riders in the group. And I won't go into too much detail, but it uses every rider in the group at various points along the ride to take up position on any corners as a visual marker for the riders behind them to know which direction they're going. Because that is, when you're out on a group ride, then corners are the places where you get lost. You get to an intersection. It's like, well, I have no idea which way did they go. Which way did they go? So, cornerman it's a more structured and slightly more complicated way of going about it, but it does allow the field to get quite spread out. Whilst pretty much guaranteeing that nobody is going to get left behind. Because it uses that system of indicating on corners using different riders and having a tail end Charlie. I've also been on plenty of far less formal rides though. So there's a group of gossip queens that I go out riding with every now and again. Yeah, you all know who I'm talking about, and we all know the gossip
Shout out
we're talking
to the
about.
queens.
So, yep, talk all you like, kids. There's no formal structure in that. But we do sort of just generally there's no more than about 4 or 5 of us. We're in a reasonably similar pace, so we do tend to stick to the speed limit, don't do anything silly, and just try and keep the group together. And if it's a sort of unwritten rule, I think if anybody out the front's starting to pull away a bit, then just back off the throttle a bit. Particularly on straights where there's no medals for going fast in a straight line. It's not impressing anyone. So using that as the opportunity to back off and wait for some nice corners to come up, and then be able to go around corners as a group. And another different model again. So the dealership rides that we organise, they're not formal led rides. It's just an informal group of people who get together and meet at point A. We agree that we're going to finish at point B. We make sure everybody knows where point B is, and we might suggest that some of us are going to go via A, B, C, D, and E, and try and do that at a reasonable pace. But also say to everybody involved that if you want to go your own way to get to the end, that's cool too. If different people want to go different routes at their own pace, then that's totally fine too. And in that one, it's more about getting to the end and having a chance to all catch up, park all the bikes up, get off, have a coffee, pretty much sit around for an hour and just talk about motorbikes. So some good chats at the end of those rides when we get to the destination. It's quite nice. Yeah,
and lots of different kinds of bikes and different riders in different stages of their riding journey experience level who join those, which is quite lovely too, I think.
Yeah, and I think when you look at these different protocols and different groups, probably the message out of that is there's no one size fits all, and it really is if there is a formal leader, then talking to the formal leader about what the expectations are, and if there isn't, then really just trying to kind of feel your way through and get a bit of a vibe for what the point of the ride is, what the abilities of the people in there, and hopefully try and suss out beforehand whether it is the kind of group that you're going to feel comfortable fitting in. Because if you're a beginner rider and you're going out with people who just want to go out, find the quickest roads in the hills and see if they can drag the knee, it's probably not going to be a lot of fun for you. It's probably just going to be intimidating, off-putting, and worst case dangerous. So, having those conversations before you get out to get a bit of a sense of where things are at can be a really good way.
Yeah, I think that's probably a really good step. So if the first step is to talk to people and talk to the leader, find out expectations or kind of what the vibe is, the other kind of side of that is to try and find groups or rides or opportunities or people to ride with that are going to give you the types of rides that you enjoy. Are you looking to improve your riding skills? Well, then you might want to find people who have more experience and technique skill than you, and have that conversation about wanting to ride in behind to follow their lines or similar. Do you want to go to new places? Well, then it might not matter too much how structured or kind of formally led the ride is if the point is to kind of go to a new place together and meet there.
Yep.
Is it something where you want to be social and meet people? That might mean probably don't go too far. If we want to be able to have a good kind of hour or so for socialising and chit chat at the other end and then kind of riding back, then that might also kind of impact the types of rides or the people that you might want to ride with. And I think the other point that you mentioned, Mark, about the kind of pace and setting the pace on the road, that there are some people who want to go on group rides because they want to go really fast together. And there are other people who want to ride as a group and experience that ride all together. So regardless of the type of rider, I suppose the other point there is to remember that it's your ride and you ride at your pace. And if they are the kind of people that you will want to spend time with, then they will hopefully make sure that you don't get lost and left behind if you are that bit slower. But even if that means kind of dropping off towards the back or taking a different route or those kinds of things, then I think just focusing on it being your ride to get what you want out of it.
Yep, I would agree. So those are a couple of general ones. I think I've got a couple of slightly more technical ones that are a bit more logistics once you're actually in there. The biggest sort of, thankfully I've never seen a bad one, but the scarier moments that I've seen where I've thought, oh, gee, that was a bit close and that could have ended badly, in group rides have tended to be when a rider is, particularly in corners, watching the rider in front of them rather than watching the corner and where they would normally ride. So if you, and it's a bit of a balance because it's nice to have somebody in front of you that you trust as being not dangerously fast, but maybe a bit more experienced than you, because you can always use them as a bit of an indicator of speed and how quickly and when you need to start braking to come into a corner if you are on a relatively similar bike. What can be problematic though is if you are following someone particularly through corners, you watch them and you watch their rear wheel, for example, rather than watching where you need to be going, and you just end up in a train following them, which then if that can do a couple of things. Firstly, it can mean that if they make a mistake, then you end up following them exactly into that mistake, rather than just focusing on, there's the road that I'm riding on. And secondly, it can increase the risk that they will see a hazard or a risk coming up ahead. You won't see that risk or hazard because you are looking at them rather than keeping your eyes up and scanning for all the usual hazards that you would when you ride. So, it's a bit of a...
It's a bit of a balance. Like you have to keep an eye out on the person in front of you in case maybe they're riding a different line, or if they might be signalling like a hazard on the road or something like that. But there is. It's very easy. I know that I've done that quite often in some of the group rides, to just focus on that rider in front of you and forget to be looking up through the corners, through that broader line of sight on the road.
Yeah, and it is that is the way that sometimes pile-ups can happen if everybody's just vaguing out, following the rider and just watching the person ahead of them, and something unexpected happens or the rider in front makes a mistake. The next thing you know, you've got a potentially carnage in there. So I've never seen bad stuff happen, but I've seen mistakes that have then ended up being bigger, that I've sort of thought, oh wow, that could have been very, very bad for all concerned because of Yeah, I think I'm trying to think if there's any other parallels, but yeah, just that vaguing out and just looking at the rider ahead of you. Always keep one eye on them, but also the other eye firmly fixed on the road, almost as if they're not there in
Yeah.
a sense.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that can potentially help avoid some of those pile-ups, which was part of the conversation with the Rad Skills course that I did, was riding in, I think, what they refer to as a race formation. So rather than, say you're in a group of 8, rather than all 8 riders kind of being, in line behind each
Single
other.
file.
Yeah, and hopefully having a good 3-second gap in between each of them. Yeah, that can take up quite a bit of space on the road. And so the protocol in that group ride was to ride in a more staggered. So you would have one person, say, in the right car wheel tyre track. The next person might be about 1.5, 2 seconds behind in the left tyre track. The next person is in the right tyre track a couple of seconds behind again, and so on. And so you are staggered right, left, or whatever however the order wants to go.
Yep.
The advantage of this was one, it takes up a little bit less space on the road, which can be a helpful thing to avoid frustrating other road users and drivers, which as good citizens is always a good idea. But I think importantly, as the rider, it does give you the opportunity to see ahead in traffic a bit more easily, to see more of the road lines, to look for hazards, those types of things. It also makes it a bit less likely that pile-ups can happen because you've got fewer people kind of one in front of the other in that single file potentially. And the main exception to this, you can ride in that race formation, generally speaking, pretty well, particularly through like city, suburbia, straight roads, lots of lights, those types of things. The exception would be when you come to corners, wanting to increase that gap to make sure you are single file again, so that everyone is taking a good, safe line through those corners. You haven't got people potentially on the outside and the inside line, and that there can be bad things happening unless you are very, very, very skilled. And I'm sure there are lots of people who think very highly of their competencies, but I would hazard a guess that nobody in here is going to be riding for the MotoGP anytime soon. So how about we just ride safely?
And particularly, yeah, totally. And particularly on the roads. There is another podcast episode. I don't think we've done it yet, Kahiwa, but about track days and getting going on track days. There is an absolute space where you can start really cranking the corners and riding as a faster group and starting to have all kinds of shenanigans. And they're called track days.
Yes.
Get a set of
They are
letters.
so much fun. They are so much fun.
They are awesome. And then half of these rules can get thrown out the window. However, we will talk about track days in another episode, maybe the next episode.
Yes.
Maybe? Yeah, maybe we will do that. There we are. Next episode, sorted. Track days it will be. Thank you, Kahiwa. And there was one more I was going to add in there as well. And it kind of, you've touched on it, but I really wanted to call it out because I have fallen foul of this through no fault of my own, giving the person ahead of you space, and particularly when you are coming into any kind of intersections, or particularly when you're coming into parking. On a nameless group ride a little while ago, a few months back now, I had somebody, so I was leading the ride, and I had somebody they were in race formation, so that was something, but they were also 2 wheel lengths behind me the entire time, even when I was doing sort of 100 k's an hour. And I did try and give them a bit of a hand signal to suggest, hey, back off and give me a bit of space here. You're not helping. And as we came into
buffer zones,
we came into an intersection. I had to make a decision about whether to cut in front of, so turning right across a main road, had to make a decision about whether to or not to try and take a tight gap, decided no, particularly because I had a group behind me. Had to brake firmly, but by no means emergency braking. And next thing you know, I had this person scooting up on my left-hand side and putting a nice big gouge in my mirror with their handlebar, my left mirror with their right handlebar. And neither of us came off. We both came to a stop, but it was definitely one of those things where, and they were incredibly apologetic about it, but I did have to sort of gently say, how about you keep a bit more space than this? And next ride, they were back doing exactly the same thing. But anyway, so give the person ahead of you space. Intersections, as we've said, like intersections as a motorcyclist, we talked about this right back in maybe episode, 3, 4, 5, somewhere around there, that intersections are one of the most dangerous places you will encounter as a motorcyclist. And when you are riding in a group, then you've also got a whole lot of additional compounding factors coming into intersections, because if you're a leader, you're trying to make decisions on behalf of a lot of other people. And as a follower, you're also trying to have enough, time to make good informed decisions about how you're going to tackle the corner, rather than trying to, sneak into gaps that aren't there, braking too hard, worrying about the person behind you, all of these kinds of things. So when you're coming into those things, then in particular, take a very large chill pill and give everybody ahead of you space. Don't worry about what's going on behind you. Just worry on what's going on ahead of you, to try and make sure that you are at least giving space. And similar as well, so one of the sometimes most comical, other times most dangerous from a low-speed, cosmetic, embarrassing damage to both motorcycles and reputations is coming into the parking area at the end of your ride.
Yes.
So if you have, and this is where the value of having a more experienced leader, or at least person who is at the front of the ride coming into that, then they should be thinking about, rather than just as you would normally do, I've got to find a park for me, they should be thinking, okay, I now have to find a park for however many people are behind me, or if it's a big group, like when I get to the One Ride, that's still something I've got to go and do a recce run of. Okay, how am I going to manage? In that case, it'll probably be about 40 bikes coming in behind me. If you are the ride leader, then hopefully you should be thinking, okay, where do I need to position myself so that everybody else can follow me in single file and make a neat, orderly parking formation somewhere. Yeah.
And if you're just joining in the ride, I think the thing to keep in mind there is similar to your point just before, Mark, about giving the person in front of you some space. This is where it's a really good idea to just increase that buffer zone, just practice your slow riding, and watch. Give yourself time to watch where everyone else is going, where the different parking options are, so that you can, as much as possible, just kind of slot in behind somebody else, whilst also leaving space for people behind you. I think the things that I have found frustrating on group rides where it's not necessarily clear where to go is when people might just kind of stop in the middle of on particular space away from others, and then there's confusion for everyone else kind of in behind about, well, where do I go? Do I go in front of you? Do I go behind? Because you're now, pulling into the curb and reversing back and all these types of things, and I don't want to hit you and all that kind of stuff. So if you are joining in on a group ride, as much as possible, just be going slow, keeping an eye out for what's kind of happening around and how you can ideally slot in or kind of move past to find another different option there.
Yep. spot on. I was going to wrap that up just saying follow the person ahead of you when you're coming into those parking, and most of the time, if you've got a decent leader, then they'll be picking a spot where they can see, oh yeah, I can fit 5 bikes, 10 bikes, however many are, and if not, then again, that's where you've got to maybe take a moment, have a bit of a think about where's a good spot that I can park that then more people can slot in behind me. Don't be that person, as Kahiwa said, that sort of rolls in and parks your bike in the most awkward, in the way, blocking every other human being at a cack angle in reverse.
I mean, you do you, obviously.
Yeah, you do you, judgment-free zone, but just try and think logically about it, and if possible, follow the person in front. And one final thing I'll say about that is it can be really easy when you are coming in a group as a new rider to forget all of the basics that you should have been practicing from doing your learner's permit, which is using your rear brake, not your front, and balancing your rear brake, friction zone in your clutch and your throttle, and using your slow riding. It's really easy to come into a parking lot and you're so focused on following everybody else, you're a little bit leaned over, you grab a bunch of front brake and the bike tips over. And I have seen it happen. I saw it on a group wide with a person, unfortunately, on an almost brand new bike.
Oh no!
Yep, coming in to try and park next to a couple of other bikes that had parked up to fill up with air, and they just came in, and you could see it from a mile off. They just grabbed the front brake, down it went. Thankfully, it didn't touch down on anything bad, and we picked it back up again, and nobody was hurt. But it's just one of those things where, I guess, keep it in your mind that you've practiced all of that stuff, but when your mind is distracted by something new that you haven't done before, like trying to park in a group of 20 other riders, then it can be easy to forget the things that you know.
And I think that's where I know that I have felt that certainly in group rides or coming into a new space, or I remember some of the longish rides that we've done where we would be going 80, 100 Ks for a good, 20, 30 minutes, and all of a sudden you come out the other end into an intersection, and I would forget how to, my brain would forget how to brake, how to actually start from first again, because being so focused on, riding through corners and riding well and all that kind of stuff for the previous time. And that comes from practice and riding often, that you're able to shift into those things that become second nature a bit more easily. But I think that's, again, if you are feeling new in group rides, or it's a somewhat new experience for you, again, that buffer zone, that's that little bit of space to give you that breathing room to allow your brain time to remember how we slow ride, how we come into a stop, how we control the bike. It's all that your brain needs is just that little bit of time to take a breath. And so I think in terms of some of the takeaways for group rides, particularly if you are new to them, I think that's probably the first one for me just to really come back to, is to think about space. It's about buffer zones. Once you are in there, making that balance between being close enough to the people in front of you that you are still in the group, and keeping up with people, so that you get that group experience, whilst also making sure that you have enough of a buffer zone and space with the people in front of you that you can see hazards, you can take good corners, you can stop when you need to, and that you have enough time to react to different things that are happening on the road. So getting that balance right will come with practice, but generally speaking, focusing on that space, I think, between you and the other riders in the group. Mark?
Yep. I was just going to say I completely agree with you about that space. And when you think about it, if you're out riding by yourself, you've already got a lot of variables that you have to manage. When you're riding in a group, you're now adding in a whole bunch of extra variables that you're trying to stay near. So it is, to start with, something that is going to take more cognitive load. So just, Kahiwa, exactly what you said. The more space around you that you can give, the more of a buffer zone you give, not just your bike and your reflexes, but also your brain.
Yeah.
To be able to cope with all that extra data. So, yeah. But having said that, I think my takeaway is that group rides are absolutely something you should try. They are a great way to meet new people, to find a bunch of roads. Like I've found roads that, I've lived in Adelaide all my life, and I go out on a group ride, and there's been times still now that I find roads that's like, wow, I didn't know that was there. That's so cool. For relatively inexperienced riders, it can also help you learn more about corner speed, about braking points, about riding lines. If you can find people that are just maybe a little bit better, a little bit quicker than you. And again, as Kahiwa said, you're not a MotoGP rider. You're not going to go out there and do that. And if you do, then you probably won't last too long. On our roads anyway. For anybody that's ridden on Adelaide
they're not
roads,
great, yeah.
yeah, don't try and do that. But yeah, finding people that you can learn from as a rider, that you can socialise with, you can learn stuff about your bike. You'll see modifications to other people's bikes that you hadn't really thought of, and if you are like me, certainly not Kahiwa, but me being a little bit socially awkward, I know, believe it or not, it does give you an incredibly easy out when you are out trying to interact with other humans rather than just hiding in the shed, because you can just ask them about their bike, and it's a common thing that people will just open up and generally talk about. So it's a good way for the socially awkward, raising my hand here,
Me too, to be honest.
to have things to talk about that are easy. So
Yes.
that's my takeaway.
It's a nice conversation starter, I think, for a lot of people, and I definitely put myself in the socially awkward box. It's one of the things I really like about group rides is the opportunity to meet new people, to see new bikes, to talk to people about their bikes, and be like, "Oh, I've been thinking about something like that. Tell me about why you like yours." And then, go home convinced that I want to buy at least 3 other new ones, and then probably don't because, money. But it's a really nice way to meet people and have conversations and see new things and new places. And I think there's those different kind of techniques that, Mark, you've talked about and we've covered here are really just to help you feel a bit more confident about actually being in there and what to expect from it and how to kind of prepare yourself for it. But I think they're worth giving a go. And so if you are looking for people to go on rides with, there are certainly a whole lot of different types of groups on sites like Facebook. Often that might be about an area or a type of ride or a brand of motorcycle or a particular identity. Shout out, of course, to Women Two Wheels South Australia, who
Absolutely.
are often organising rides formally but also just informally between different members across kind of Greater Adelaide, that there's almost always something kind of going on in there. And I know that there are adventure ride groups on Facebook and others as well. I think you can also potentially talk to some of your local bike stores, and so the dealership that Mark works for often organises some or is a part of some, and I'm sure other dealerships might do similarly for their clients or particular brands.
And even if they don't, there'll be people working there. I mean, you rarely work in a motorbike shop unless you love motorbikes. Even if there's nothing official through your local dealership, then odds are people in there will know people who know people.
Yes. And sometimes it's just about finding friends who are also motorcyclists and be like, I would like to go for a ride. Shall we go and find somewhere to have a coffee? And, like your gossip queens, that can be a nice way to nice way to do that. I think some of the other more formal organised rides are often ones for charities. I know,
Good point.
Mark, in the segment, the interview that you had on Motor Chat just recently, they often will share upcoming formal organised rides for different types of events. So if you've got a local radio station or other kind of site or motorcycle clubs, they can often also be good places to keep an eye out for rides. And potentially, sites like Women Moto and others that are sharing details about different parts of motorcycling. They can often also talk about those as well.
Cool. Well, as I look out my window, the sun is going down and I realise I'm getting darker and darker, looking like I'm sitting in a dark room with two bright lights focusing on me, which is exactly what I am doing. So I think that wraps it up for today. In our next episode, Kahiwa, I think we might as well talk about track days. Let's talk about getting out and doing beginners doing your very first track day and what you need to think about and why it's the most awesome thing you'll ever do.
Oh, so good. So much fun. I love it.
Better than parenthood. Better than sex.
Honestly, I think I have never felt as safe riding as when I did in the track days that we have done. So stay tuned for that.
Stay tuned.
But until then, please ride safe and have fun. Beyond the Pillion is brought to you by Kahiwa Sebire and Mark Drechsler, and with the support of Women Moto, the online magazine for women motorcyclists. Go to womenmoto.com. If you liked today's episode, please remember to rate, review and subscribe and tell a friend. It helps others find the podcast.